A starving boy with scars carved into his arms by his own father appeared at Elijah Cade's fence and asked him one impossible question. The answer would force a broken cowboy to become the one thing he swore he could never be, a father. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The boy appeared at the edge of Elijah Cade's property on a Tuesday morning in late September, when the Colorado sky stretched endless and blue above the mountains and the aspens had just begun their slow surrender to gold. Elijah noticed him first as a smudge of movement near the fence line, a small figure that seemed to materialize from the dust itself, watching the ranch with the wary stillness of a creature that had learned early that survival meant knowing when to run. At 53 years old, Elijah had seen enough of the world to recognize that particular kind of watchfulness. It belonged to things that had been hunted. He set down the bridle he had been mending and walked to the edge of the barn, squinting against the morning light. The boy could not have been more than 8 or 9, though hunger and hard living had a way of making children look younger than their years. His clothes were torn and filthy, hanging loose on a frame that suggested too many missed meals. But it was the way he held himself that caught Elijah's attention most, shoulders hunched forward as if bracing for a blow that might come from any direction, eyes darting constantly between the house and the road and the distant tree line. This was a child who had learned to map escape routes before he learned to trust. Elijah had lived alone on this ranch for 7 years now, ever since Margaret had passed and taken the last of his reasons for softness with her. The solitude suited him well enough. He had his horses and his cattle and the endless work that kept a man's hands busy and his mind quiet. He had no use for company and even less for the complications that came with it. But something about the boy standing at his fence made him pause, made him remember things he had spent years trying to forget. He walked toward the fence slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried, the way he approached skittish colts that had never known a gentle hand. The boy tensed as he drew closer but did not run, which told Elijah something important about the depth of his desperation. Running took energy, and energy required food, and this child looked like he had neither to spare. "You lost, son?" Elijah asked, stopping a respectful distance from where the boy stood. His voice came out rougher than he intended, unused to addressing anything that might answer back. The boy shook his head, a quick, nervous movement that reminded Elijah of a rabbit freezing in tall grass. Then, seeming to reconsider, he shrugged one thin shoulder. His eyes finally met Elijah's, and in them was a calculation far too old for his young face, the weighing of risks and rewards that should have belonged to men twice his age. "You the one they call the scarred cowboy?" the boy asked. His voice was hoarse, cracking slightly, and Elijah wondered how long it had been since he had used it for more than screaming. "Some folks call me that," Elijah admitted. He did not bother asking how the boy had heard of him. Stories traveled fast in small towns, and his particular story had been traveling for longer than this child had been alive. The war, the fire, the scars that covered his arms and shoulders and the left side of his face, marking him forever as a man who had walked through hell and somehow walked back out again. The boy seemed to consider this information carefully, his gaze dropping to Elijah's hands where they rested on the fence post. The scars there were visible even in the gentle morning light, twisted ropes of pale tissue that mapped the path of flames across his skin. Most people looked away when they noticed them. This boy looked closer. "I heard you were brave," the boy said quietly. "In the war and after. I heard you save people from a burning building even though you were already hurt. I heard you were not afraid of anything." Elijah felt something shift in his chest, an old ache stirring to life in places he had thought long dead. People told stories about him, he knew. Some of them were even true. But bravery was a word that sat uneasy on his shoulders, a coat that had never quite fit right, no matter how many times he tried to wear it. "People hear a lot of things," he said carefully. "Does not mean they are all true." The boy's jaw tightened, and for a moment something fierce flickered behind his eyes, something that looked almost like anger. He pushed up the torn sleeve of his shirt, revealing his forearm, and Elijah felt his breath catch in his throat. Scars covered the child's skin, not the random marks of accident or illness, but deliberate wounds. Parallel lines that spoke of cruelty beyond imagining, of pain inflicted with terrible precision by someone who should have protected this child instead of destroying him. "Can you teach me to be brave, sir?" the boy asked, and his voice trembled only slightly. "I need to learn. I need to know how to stop being afraid all the time." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more than the boy could possibly understand. Elijah looked at those scars, saw in them a story he did not need to hear to comprehend, and felt something crack open inside him that he had kept locked away for years. He thought of Margaret, of the children they had never had, of all the empty rooms in his house that echoed with possibilities that would never come to pass. "What is your name, son?" he asked finally. The boy hesitated, and Elijah could see him deciding whether to trust this stranger with something as precious as his own identity. Then his chin lifted slightly, a tiny gesture of defiance that seemed to cost him everything he had. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Marsh. My PA is the one who did this to me, and my ma is dead, and I ran away 3 days ago, and I've been walking ever since. I do not know where I am going, but I heard about you in town, and I thought maybe you could teach me how to be brave enough to never go back there, to never let anyone hurt me again." Elijah looked at the scars on the boy's arm, then down at his own hands, marked by a different kind of fire, but burned just the same. He thought about bravery and what it really meant, about the difference between fearlessness and courage, about all the things he had learned in the darkest moments of his life that no one had ever thought to teach him. The boy was asking for something Elijah was not sure he possessed, not sure he could give. But standing there in the September morning with the mountains watching and the wind carrying the scent of change, he found himself unable to turn away from those desperate, hopeful eyes. "Come inside," he said, unlatching the gate. "You look like you could use a meal and a bath. We can talk about bravery after you have had both." Daniel followed Elijah into the ranch house with the careful, measured steps of someone expecting a trap at every turn. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits and obstacles, noting the placement of furniture and the distance to doors. Elijah recognized that behavior too well. He had done the same thing for months after returning from the war, unable to enter any space without first planning how he would escape it if everything went wrong. The house was simple but well kept, a testament to the discipline that had sustained Elijah through his years of solitude. The main room held a stone fireplace, a worn leather chair, a small table with 2 seats that had not seen a second occupant in longer than he cared to remember. Margaret's touch was still visible in small ways: the curtains she had sewn, the quilt draped over the back of the chair, the dried flowers in a vase onto the windowsill that he replaced each spring, because he could not bear to let that tradition die with her. "Sit," Elijah said, gesturing toward the table. "I will heat some stew." Daniel lowered himself into the chair slowly, his body tense and ready to spring up at the first sign of danger. He watched Elijah move around the kitchen with that same calculating gaze, tracking his hands, his movements, the location of anything that might be used as a weapon. It broke something in Elijah's heart to see a child so young, so thoroughly trained in the art of survival. The stew was left over from the night before, thick with potatoes and carrots and chunks of beef from a steer he had slaughtered last month. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it before the boy, along with a hunk of bread and a glass of water. Daniel stared at the food, as if he could not quite believe it was real. "Go on," Elijah said, settling into the chair across from him. "It is not poisoned. I am a better cook than that." A ghost of something that might have been a smile flickered across Daniel's face, there and gone so quickly Elijah almost missed it. Then the boy picked up the spoon and began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing desperation, as his body remembered what it meant to have food available. Elijah watched in silence, remembering his own hunger during the worst days of the war, the way starvation stripped away everything but the animal need to survive. When the bowl was empty, Daniel looked up with something like embarrassment coloring his thin cheeks. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a gesture that spoke of meals eaten in haste and secrecy, of food stolen rather than given. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That was real good. There is more if you want it." Daniel shook his head, though Elijah could see the longing in his eyes. His stomach had likely shrunk from days of deprivation, unable to hold as much as it needed. That would change with time and regular meals if the boy stayed long enough for his body to remember what normal felt like. Elijah leaned back in his chair and studied the child across from him. In better light, he could see the full extent of the damage. Bruises in various stages of healing mottled Daniel's face and arms. His lip had been split recently and was still scabbed over. Beneath the dirt and the fear, he had features that might have been pleasant under different circumstances. Brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, eyes the color of storm clouds, a stubborn set to his jaw that suggested strength waiting to be discovered. "How long has your PA been hurting you?" Elijah asked. He kept his voice gentle, free of judgment or pity, knowing instinctively that this boy would reject both. Daniel's shoulders hunched forward, his hands curling into fists on the table. "Long as I can remember," he said. "It got worse after Ma died. She used to stop him sometimes, or at least make him go easier. But then she got the fever last winter, and after that there was no one to make him stop at all." The words came out flat and matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who had long since exhausted their capacity for tears over this particular pain. Elijah recognized that too. There came a point in suffering when grief became simply another fact of existence, no more remarkable than breathing or the setting of the sun. "And you walked here from where?" "Millbrook. It is about 30 miles east." 30 miles. Elijah did the math in his head. 3 days of walking for a child with no food and no supplies, sleeping rough in the September chill, driven by nothing but terror and the desperate hope that somewhere there was a man who could teach him not to be afraid anymore. "That took courage," Elijah said carefully, "walking all that way alone." Daniel shook his head, fierce and immediate. "It was not courage. I was scared the whole time. Scared he would find me. Scared I would starve. Scared of the dark and the animals and everything else. I ran because I was afraid, not because I was brave." Elijah considered this for a long moment, turning the words over in his mind like stones in a river. The boy had asked him to teach bravery, but he was beginning to understand that the lesson needed here was not the one Daniel thought he was requesting. "You know what I was most afraid of during the war?" Elijah asked. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering across his features. He shook his head. "I was afraid of being afraid." Elijah held up his scarred hands, letting the light play across the ruined skin. "I thought brave men did not feel fear. I thought there was something wrong with me because my hands shook before every battle, because my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, because sometimes I wanted to run so badly I could taste it." He lowered his hands and met the boy's eyes directly. "Took me years to learn that fear and bravery are not opposites. They are partners. You cannot have one without the other." Daniel frowned, clearly struggling with this concept. "But brave people are not afraid. That is what brave means." "No," Elijah said quietly. "Brave means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. And son, you have already proven you know how to do that. You just have not realized it yet." The bath was drawn in a large copper tub near the fireplace, water heated in kettles on the stove and poured steaming into the basin. Elijah laid out clean clothes that had belonged to the son of a ranch hand who had worked for him years ago, garments that had been left behind and never claimed, waiting in a trunk for a purpose they had finally found. The shirt and trousers would be too large for Daniel's thin frame, but they would be clean and whole, and sometimes that was enough. He left the boy to wash in privacy, stepping out onto the porch to give Daniel space and to wrestle with the question of what he was supposed to do now. 3 days ago, his life had been simple. Wake before dawn, tend to the horses, mend what needed mending, eat alone, sleep alone, repeat until the day came when he did not wake up at all. It was not happiness, but it was peace of a sort, the quiet acceptance of a man who had made his bargains with fate and expected nothing more from the time he had left. Now there was a child in his house, a broken boy with scars on his arms and fear in his eyes, asking to be taught something Elijah was not certain he understood himself. The responsibility of it pressed against his chest like a physical weight. He had failed people before. He had let them down in ways that still haunted his dreams. The thought of failing this boy, of making promises he could not keep, was almost enough to make him walk back inside and tell Daniel to move on, to find someone better suited to the task of saving him. But then he thought of those scars, deliberate and cruel, and he knew he could not turn the child away. Whatever happened next, whatever mistakes he made, he could not send Daniel back into a world that had already hurt him so badly. Margaret would never have forgiven him for that. He would never have forgiven himself. The door creaked open behind him, and Elijah turned to find Daniel standing in the borrowed clothes, his hair damp and slicked back from his face, his skin scrubbed pink and clean. Without the layers of dirt and the distraction of his ragged clothing, the boy looked even younger than before, even more fragile. But there was something else visible now too, a straightness to his spine that had not been there earlier, a lift to his chin that suggested the bath had washed away more than just grime. "Feel better?" Elijah asked. Daniel nodded, then hesitated, clearly uncertain what was expected of him now. The bath and the meal had been gifts, and in his experience, gifts always came with prices attached. Elijah could see him bracing for the demand, the catch, the revelation of what he would have to give in return for this temporary kindness. "Come with me," Elijah said, stepping off the porch. "There is something I want to show you." He led Daniel across the yard toward the barn, matching his pace to the boy's shorter stride. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs, and the mountains rose purple and majestic in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the approaching winter. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, demanding much but giving back in equal measure to those who earned its respect. The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and horse and the particular musk of animals well cared for. Elijah's horses stirred in their stalls as they entered, ears pricking forward with curiosity at the unfamiliar presence. There were 6 of them, ranging from a massive draft horse named Solomon to a delicate painted mare called Lily, who had been Margaret's favorite, and whom Elijah could never bring himself to sell. Daniel's eyes went wide as they adjusted to the low light, taking in the size of the animals with a mixture of wonder and wariness. "You have a lot of horses," he said, his voice hushed as if he were in church. "Breeding and training," Elijah explained. "It is how I make my living. Raise them from foals, gentle them, teach them to trust people, then sell them to folks who need good working horses." He stopped in front of a stall near the back, where a young stallion stood watching them with alert, intelligent eyes. This horse was different from the others, darker in both color and temperament, his black coat marked with old scars that told a story of abuse and neglect. "This is Shadow," Elijah said. "I bought him 6 months ago from a man who was going to shoot him because he could not be broken. He had been beaten and starved and burned with hot irons until he trusted nothing and no one. First month I had him, he tried to kill me twice." Daniel stared at the horse, and Elijah could see the recognition dawning in his young face, the understanding that he was looking at a creature whose experience mirrored his own. "What did you do?" Daniel asked softly. "I was patient," Elijah replied. "I let him learn that not every hand raised against him meant pain. I fed him and sheltered him and asked nothing in return until he was ready to give it. Took 3 months before he would let me touch him. Took 5 before he would let me put a halter on him." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of dried apple, holding it out on his flat palm. Shadow's nostrils flared, and for a moment the old fear flickered in his dark eyes. Then, slowly, carefully, the horse stepped forward and took the treat, his velvet lips brushing against Elijah's scarred skin with impossible gentleness. "Bravery is not about not being afraid," Elijah said, watching Daniel watch the horse. "It is about learning that fear does not have to control you. Shadow here was afraid of everything when he came to me. He is still afraid sometimes, but he has learned that he can choose what to do with that fear instead of letting it choose for him." Daniel reached out a tentative hand toward the stall, then pulled it back, uncertainty written across his features. "Can I touch him?" "Not yet," Elijah said. "Trust has to be earned from both sides. But if you stay, if you are willing to put in the work, I will teach you how." The decision to let Daniel stay was not made in a single moment, but accumulated gradually over the following days, built from small choices that added up to something larger than either of them had planned. Elijah cleared out the spare bedroom that had sat empty since Margaret's passing, airing the linens and sweeping away the dust of years. He adjusted his morning routine to include a second plate at breakfast, a second voice at the table, a second presence in the quiet spaces of his life that had been silent for so long. Daniel approached each day with the cautious optimism of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. He woke before dawn without being asked, made his bed with military precision, and appeared in the kitchen ready to work before Elijah had finished his first cup of coffee. The boy was desperate to be useful, to earn his place, to prove that keeping him was not a mistake. It hurt Elijah to watch, recognizing in that desperate industry the same fear that had driven his own early years, the terror that being worthless meant being discarded. "First lesson," Elijah said on the third morning, setting down his coffee cup. "You do not have to earn the right to exist. You are here because I want you here, not because of what you can do for me." Daniel's hands stilled where they had been scrubbing the breakfast dishes, his shoulders tensing. He did not turn around, but Elijah could see the struggle playing out in the rigid line of his spine, the battle between wanting to believe and knowing better than to trust. "My PA said I was worthless," Daniel said quietly. "Said the only reason he kept me around was because someone had to do the chores my ma used to do. Said if I could not make myself useful, there was no point in wasting food on me." "Your PA was wrong about a lot of things," Elijah replied. "That was one of them." He rose from the table and crossed to stand beside the boy, close enough to offer presence but not so close as to crowd. Through the window above the sink, they could see the horses grazing in the morning light, Shadow standing slightly apart from the others as he always did, his dark coat gleaming like polished obsidian. "You see how Shadow keeps his distance from the herd?" Elijah asked. "He does that because he learned that getting close to others meant getting hurt. He thinks being alone is safer than risking pain." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the isolated horse. "But horses are not meant to be alone," Elijah continued. "They are herd animals. They need connection, companionship, the knowledge that they belong somewhere. Shadow is surviving out there by himself, but he is not thriving. Part of healing for him is going to be learning that he can be part of something again without being destroyed by it." He let the words settle, watching Daniel's face for signs of understanding. "Same is true for people," Elijah said finally. "We are not meant to carry everything alone. Asking for help is not weakness. Needing others is not a flaw. Your PA taught you that needing things made you vulnerable, and maybe he was right about that. But being vulnerable is not the same as being worthless. Sometimes it is the bravest thing you can do." They worked side by side that morning, mucking out stalls and laying fresh hay, filling water troughs and measuring grain. Elijah showed Daniel how to approach the horses properly, always from the side where they could see you coming, always with calm movements and a steady voice. He explained how prey animals thought differently from predators, how their survival depended on being alert to danger, how trust had to be built through consistency and patience rather than force. Daniel absorbed everything with fierce concentration, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind beneath the layers of trauma and neglect. He wanted to understand not just what to do, but why, wanted to grasp the principles beneath the practices. Elijah found himself enjoying the teaching in ways he had not expected, drawing on knowledge he had accumulated over decades and finding new meaning in it through the act of passing it on. By midday, they had worked through most of the barn chores, and Elijah called a break for lunch. They sat on hay bales eating sandwiches, and for the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, picking at the crust of his bread. Elijah nodded, bracing himself for whatever was coming. "The scars on your face and hands." Daniel's voice was hesitant but determined. "How did you get them?" It was a fair question, one Elijah had known would come eventually. He set down his sandwich and looked at his hands, turning them over to examine the familiar landscape of ruined skin. "There was a fire," he said, "during the war and then again after. The first time a cannon blast hit an ammunition wagon near where I was standing. caught fire immediately, and 2 of my friends were trapped underneath. I pulled them out, but my arms and hands were burned badly in the process. He touched the left side of his face, where the scarring was thickest. The second time was after I came home. A family in town, their house caught fire in the middle of the night. Father and mother got out, but their 2 children were still inside. I went in after them. "Did you save them?" Daniel asked. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, old grief stirring in his chest like embers that had never fully died. "I saved one," he said finally. "Little girl, about your age, got her out the window before the roof came down. But her brother was deeper in the house, and by the time I reached him, I paused, swallowing hard. I was too late." "I am sorry," Daniel said softly. Elijah shook his head. "Point is not to make you feel sorry for me. Point is that I was terrified both times, scared out of my mind. But I did what needed doing anyway, and I have had to live with the results ever since, both the good and the bad." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural, as if Daniel had always been part of the ranch, and Elijah had always been waiting for him to arrive. Mornings began with chores, afternoons with lessons, evenings with quiet hours by the fire where Elijah read aloud from the small collection of books Margaret had left behind. Daniel listened to those stories with rapt attention, hungry for words and worlds beyond the narrow boundaries of his previous existence. His body began to heal first, the visible wounds fading as regular meals and restful sleep did their work. The bruises yellowed and disappeared. The split lip mended into a thin pink line that would eventually vanish entirely. He gained weight steadily, his cheeks filling out, his movements becoming less cautious as his strength returned. By the end of the first month, he looked like a different child entirely, still thin but no longer gaunt, still watchful but no longer terrified. The invisible wounds took longer. Daniel still flinched at sudden movements, still woke screaming from nightmares he refused to discuss, still froze sometimes in the middle of ordinary tasks when something triggered memories he could not escape. Elijah learned to recognize the signs of an approaching episode, the way Daniel's breathing would quicken and his eyes would go distant, and he developed strategies for bringing the boy back gently, grounding him in the present through touch and voice and patient reassurance. One evening, as autumn deepened toward winter and the first serious frost silvered the grass, Daniel asked the question Elijah had been expecting since the beginning. "What happened to your wife?" They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains in streaks of orange and purple. Elijah had a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, and Daniel was wrapped in one of Margaret's old quilts, the one with the wedding ring pattern she had spent an entire winter piecing together. "She died," Elijah said simply. 7 years ago this December. Fever took her, same as your ma." Daniel pulled the quilt tighter around his shoulders. "Did you love her? More than anything in this world?" Elijah's voice was rough with old grief, but he did not try to hide it. "We were married 23 years. Met when I was not much older than you, married when I was 19. She was the only person who ever made me feel like I was worth something, like the scars did not matter, like I could be more than what the world had made of me." He took a sip of his coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. "When she died, I wanted to die too. Spent a long time trying to figure out why I should bother getting up in the morning when there was nothing left worth getting up for. The horses saved me, I think. They needed feeding and watering and caring for whether I wanted to exist or not. Gave me something to do with my hands while I waited for the worst of the pain to pass." "Does it ever pass?" Daniel asked. "The pain, I mean. Does it ever go away completely?" Elijah considered the question carefully, wanting to give an honest answer rather than an easy one. "No," he said finally. "It changes, though. Gets softer around the edges. You learn to carry it differently, to make room for it alongside the other things in your life instead of letting it take up all the space. Some days you almost forget it is there. Other days it hits you fresh like it just happened. But you survive it, over and over, and eventually surviving stops feeling like such hard work." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his young face grave in the fading light. "I do not want to just survive," he said softly. "I want to actually live. I want to stop being afraid all the time. I want to feel like I matter, like I am not just taking up space that someone else deserves more." The words cracked something open in Elijah's chest, a door he had kept locked for so long he had forgotten what lay behind it. "You matter," he said, and his voice came out fierce with conviction. "You matter to me. You matter to Shadow and the other horses who look for you every morning. You matter to this ranch and to this life we are building together. And someday, if you keep working and healing and growing, you are going to matter to a whole lot of other people too. People who will be glad you were brave enough to survive." Daniel turned to look at him, and in the boy's storm-gray eyes, Elijah saw something that had not been there before. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it. A fragile, trembling hope that was reaching toward the light, despite everything that had tried to crush it. "You really think so?" Daniel asked. "I know so," Elijah replied. "I have seen a lot of broken things in my life, son. I have been a broken thing myself, and I have learned that broken does not mean destroyed. It just means you have to be rebuilt differently than you were before, and sometimes the new version is stronger than the original ever was." He reached out and placed his scarred hand on Daniel's shoulder, feeling the boy tense briefly before relaxing into the touch. "You have already shown more courage than most grown men I have known," Elijah said. "You walked 30 miles alone, scared out of your mind, to find help. You trusted a stranger when you had every reason to believe trust would get you hurt. You get up every morning and face a world that has given you nothing but pain, and you keep trying anyway. That is not weakness, Daniel. That is bravery of the highest order." Daniel's lower lip trembled, and for a moment Elijah thought he might cry. But the boy held himself together, chin lifting in that stubborn gesture that had become so familiar. "I do not feel brave," he said. Elijah squeezed his shoulder gently. "Nobody who is truly brave ever does. That is how you know it is real." Winter arrived with a vengeance in early November, blanketing the ranch in snow that drifted waist-high against the barn walls and turned the familiar landscape into something alien and treacherous. Elijah had weathered many Colorado winters, but this one carried a particular ferocity, temperatures plunging so low that the water in the troughs froze solid overnight and had to be broken fresh each morning. He and Daniel worked together to keep the animals fed and sheltered, their breath crystallizing in the frigid air as they hauled hay and checked on the horses huddled together for warmth. Daniel took to the hard work with determination that bordered on desperation, as if proving his usefulness could somehow guarantee his place in this new life. Elijah watched him struggle with tasks too heavy for his still recovering body and had to balance his admiration for the boy's spirit against his concern for his health. More than once, he ordered Daniel inside to warm up over the boy's protests, recognizing the fear beneath the stubbornness and addressing it directly. "You are not going to be sent away for resting when you need to," Elijah said one afternoon, steering Daniel toward the house after the boy's hands had turned an alarming shade of blue. "Your worth is not measured by how much you can suffer." The words seemed to land somewhere deep, and Daniel stopped arguing, though the tension in his shoulders suggested the lesson had not fully taken root. Some teachings required repetition, Elijah knew. Some truths had to be learned over and over before they finally stuck. The enforced closeness of winter created opportunities for conversation that the busier seasons had not allowed. Trapped inside by blizzards that howled for days at a time, they talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. Elijah learned that Daniel loved mathematics and hated spelling, that he had taught himself to read from a Bible his mother had hidden from his father, that he dreamed of someday seeing the ocean, though he could barely imagine what so much water would look like. In return, Elijah shared pieces of himself he had not spoken of in years. He told Daniel about the war, about the friends he had lost and the ones he had saved, about the nightmares that still visited him sometimes when the wind sounded too much like cannon fire. He talked about Margaret, about their courtship and marriage, and the quiet joy of building a life with someone who truly knew you. He even spoke about the children they had wanted but never had, the nursery that had stayed empty, the grief that had lived alongside their happiness like a shadow they learned to ignore. "You would have been a good father," Daniel said one evening, his voice soft in the fire-lit room. The words struck Elijah like a physical blow, unexpected and painfully sweet. He had to clear his throat twice before he could respond. "I appreciate you saying that," he managed. "I mean it." Daniel looked up from the book he had been reading, his expression earnest. "You are patient and kind, and you explain things without making me feel stupid. You do not hit when you get angry. You do not yell or throw things or make me feel scared to be around you. That is what fathers are supposed to be like." I did not know that before. The implicit comparison to Daniel's own father hung unspoken in the air between them. Elijah felt a surge of fury toward a man he had never met, a man who had taken the sacred trust of parenthood and twisted it into something monstrous. He wanted to find this man and show him what it felt like to be small and helpless and afraid. He wanted justice for the boy sitting across from him, for all the years of pain that could never be undone. But vengeance would not heal Daniel's wounds. Only time and patience and love could do that. The slow work of rebuilding what had been broken, of proving through daily action that not all hands were raised to harm. "Your father was wrong about you," Elijah said carefully. "And he was wrong about what strength means. Real strength is not about hurting people smaller than you. Real strength is about protecting them." Daniel nodded slowly, and Elijah could see him filing the words away, adding them to the growing collection of new truths that were gradually replacing the lies he had been raised on. The crisis came in late January, when a rider appeared at the ranch during a brief break in the storms. Elijah recognized him as Tom Hadley, one of the hands from the Morrison spread 20 miles north, a reliable man not given to unnecessary journeys in dangerous weather. Something about his expression made Elijah's stomach tighten even before he spoke. "Got some news you need to hear," Tom said, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. "There is a man in town asking after a boy named Daniel Marsh. Says he is the boy's father and he wants him back." Daniel had been standing just inside the doorway, and Elijah heard the sharp intake of breath behind him, felt the terror radiating off the child like heat from a forge. "He cannot have him," Elijah said, his voice flat and hard. Tom held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am not here to argue with you about it. Just thought you should know. Man is staying at the boarding house, telling anyone who will listen that his son was kidnapped by a stranger, and he has come to bring him home. Some folks believe him. Others are not so sure." "What do you believe?" Tom's eyes flicked to Daniel, taking in the boy's pale face and trembling hands. "I believe no child looks that scared at the mention of his father unless he has good reason to be," Tom said quietly. "But what I believe does not matter much when it comes to the law. If that man can prove Daniel is his son, he has got rights. Might be hard to argue against them." The words settled over the room like a death sentence. Elijah felt Daniel press close against his side, seeking protection, and he put a hand on the boy's shoulder without thinking. "He is not taking him," Elijah said again. "I will die first." The days following Tom's warning passed in a haze of dread and preparation. Elijah retrieved the rifle he kept locked in the back of his closet and cleaned it with hands that remembered the motions from decades past. He taught Daniel the layout of the root cellar beneath the house, showing him the hidden entrance behind the woodpile and making him practice finding it in the dark. If trouble came, the boy would have a place to hide where no one would think to look. Daniel moved through the ranch like a ghost, his old fears rushing back to fill the spaces that healing had begun to clear. He flinched at every sound, started at every shadow, and the nightmares returned with redoubled intensity. Elijah woke more than once to find the boy standing at his bedroom door, too afraid to sleep alone, but too proud to ask for comfort. "Come on," Elijah would say each time, lifting the blankets. "Plenty of room." They would lie side by side in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside, and eventually Daniel's breathing would slow and deepen into exhausted sleep. Elijah would stay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, planning and discarding strategies for the confrontation he knew was coming. On the 5th day, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Elijah saw him coming from a distance, a dark figure on a bay horse cutting through the snow with purposeful determination. He was waiting on the porch when the man arrived, rifle cradled casually in his arms, positioned to block the door without appearing overtly threatening. The man who dismounted was smaller than Elijah had expected, wiry and mean-looking, with close-set eyes that reminded him of a rat. There was no resemblance to Daniel that Elijah could see, nothing in this man's face that echoed the boy's features. But there was something familiar in his posture, a coiled readiness for violence that Elijah recognized from his years in the army. "You are the one they call Cade," the man said. It was not a question. "I am, and you would be Marsh." The man's lips twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "So you know why I am here? Good. That saves time. I want my boy back." Elijah did not move, did not blink, did not let any emotion show on his scarred face. "You mean the boy you beat and burned and starved until he ran away to save his own life? That boy?" Marsh's expression flickered, a flash of anger quickly suppressed. "Whatever lies he told you, he is still my son. The law says he belongs with me. I have papers to prove it." "Papers do not make a father," Elijah replied, "and they do not erase the scars you left on him." For a long moment the two men stared at each other across the snow-covered yard. Elijah could feel Daniel watching from somewhere inside the house, could sense the boy's terror pressing against his back like a physical weight. He kept his posture relaxed, his hands steady on the rifle, projecting a calm he did not entirely feel. "I do not want trouble," Marsh said finally, though his tone suggested exactly the opposite. "Just give me the boy and I will be on my way. No need for anyone to get hurt. That is where you are wrong." Elijah's voice was quiet, almost conversational. "There is every need for someone to get hurt. You hurt that child for years. You made him believe he was worthless, made him think pain was all he deserved. That kind of hurt does not just go away because you show up with legal papers." "He is my property," Marsh snapped, the mask of reasonableness slipping. "I have the right to discipline him however I see fit. That is what the law says. The law says a lot of things." Elijah took a step forward, and Marsh instinctively retreated. "The law also says a man can defend his home against intruders, that he can protect those in his care from harm. You want to test which law matters more out here, you go right ahead. But I should warn you, I have killed men before. Done it up close and personal. Watched the light go out of their eyes. It is not something I enjoy, but it is something I am good at." The threat hung in the frozen air between them, stark and undeniable. Marsh's face went pale, and for the first time Elijah saw uncertainty flicker in those rat-like eyes. "You would die for a boy that is not even yours." "I would die for any child who needed protecting," Elijah replied. "But Daniel is mine now, in every way that matters. I have fed him and sheltered him, and taught him what it means to be valued. I have watched him heal from the damage you did, watched him learn to trust again despite everything you taught him about the world. That makes him my son, papers or no papers. And I will not let you hurt him ever again." Marsh's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip, and Elijah raised the rifle smoothly, the barrel centering on the other man's chest. "Do not," Elijah said softly. "I am faster than you, and I have got nothing left to lose. You reach for that weapon, you will be dead before your fingers touch the grip." The moment stretched, taut as wire, the whole world narrowing to the space between two men and the violence that trembled on the edge of becoming real. Then Marsh's hand fell back to his side and he took another step backward. "This is not over," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I will be back with the sheriff. We will see what the law has to say about kidnappers and thieves." "You do that," Elijah replied. "And while you are at it, maybe explain to the sheriff how your son came to be covered in scars. How he walked 30 miles alone because death on the prairie seemed better than another day under your roof. I am sure that will make for interesting conversation." Marsh mounted his horse without another word and rode away across the snow, his figure shrinking until it disappeared beyond the tree line. Only then did Elijah lower the rifle, his hands finally beginning to shake with reaction. The door opened behind him and Daniel emerged, pale and trembling but alive. "Still here, still safe. He said he would come back," Daniel whispered. "Let him," Elijah replied, pulling the boy close. "We will be ready." The sheriff arrived 3 days later, riding alongside Marsh, and a man in a dark suit who carried a leather satchel full of documents. Elijah had been expecting them, had spent the intervening time preparing both the ranch and himself for whatever was coming. Daniel was hidden in the root cellar with supplies to last a week, strict instructions not to emerge until Elijah himself came to get him, and a loaded pistol that Elijah had taught him to use with trembling hands and grim determination. Sheriff Coleman was a man Elijah had known for years, a fair-minded individual who had always treated him with respect despite the scars and the rumors that followed him everywhere. They had shared drinks at the saloon on occasion, discussed horses and weather and the small concerns of rural life. Elijah had hoped that history would count for something when the moment came. The man in the suit introduced himself as Walter Crane, a lawyer from Denver who specialized in family matters. His handshake was limp, and his smile did not reach his eyes, and Elijah disliked him immediately. They sat in the main room of the ranch house, an awkward gathering of men with conflicting purposes. Marsh kept glancing around as if expecting Daniel to materialize from behind the furniture, his agitation growing more visible with each passing minute. Sheriff Coleman looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Only Crane seemed at ease, spreading his documents across the table with practiced efficiency. "The law is clear," Crane said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to winning arguments. "Mr. Marsh is Daniel's legal father. He has birth records, marriage certificates, everything needed to establish paternity. Under Colorado law, he has the right to custody of his minor child. The law does not account for what that child has suffered," Elijah replied. He kept his voice calm, reasonable, though rage simmered just beneath the surface. "I have seen the scars. I have heard the nightmares. That boy was tortured in his own home by a man who should have protected him." Crane's expression did not change. "Allegations of abuse require evidence and proper legal proceedings. You cannot simply keep a child from his father based on claims that have not been substantiated in court. The scars on his body are not evidence enough. Scars can come from many sources." Marsh leaned forward, his face twisted with false concern. "Daniel was always a clumsy child, accident-prone. I tried to protect him, but boys will be boys. He fell downstairs, ran into fences, got kicked by horses. It broke my heart every time he hurt himself." The lies were so blatant, so smoothly delivered, that Elijah felt physically sick. He looked at Sheriff Coleman, searching for some sign that the man saw through this performance, but the sheriff's expression was troubled and uncertain. "Elijah," Coleman said quietly, "I have known you a long time. I know you are not the type to take a child without good reason. But the law is the law. If Mr. Marsh has legal custody, I cannot just ignore that because you believe the boy is better off here. Then let Daniel speak for himself." Elijah's voice was sharp. "Let him tell you what his father did to him. Let him show you the scars and explain how he got them. If you still believe Marsh after that, then God help us all." Crane shook his head. "The testimony of a child is unreliable, particularly one who has been coached by an interested party. Daniel has been in your care for months now. Who knows what you have told him, what stories you have encouraged him to believe." The accusation was so outrageous that Elijah nearly laughed. "You think I invented those scars? You think I carved marks into that boy's skin to support some lie? I think children are impressionable and easily manipulated." Crane's smile was thin and cold. "I think a lonely man might convince himself he was rescuing a child when in fact he was stealing one. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable." Marsh nodded eagerly, sensing advantage. "That is exactly what happened. This man has filled my son's head with lies, turned him against his own father. Daniel was happy at home until this stranger interfered with our family. Happy." Elijah repeated the word like a curse. "So happy that he walked 30 miles through wilderness to escape you. So happy that he cannot sleep without screaming. So happy that he flinches every time someone raises a hand near him." Sheriff Coleman held up his hands, forestalling further argument. "This is not getting us anywhere." He turned to Elijah with genuine regret in his eyes. "I need to see the boy. I need to ask him some questions myself, form my own judgment. Will you bring him out?" Elijah hesitated. Every instinct screamed against revealing Daniel's hiding place, against putting the child anywhere near the monster who had hurt him. But he also knew that refusing would only confirm Crane's narrative, would make him look like the kidnapper they were painting him to be. "I will bring him," Elijah said finally. "But I want it on record that I am doing this under protest, and that I hold all of you responsible for whatever trauma this causes him." He rose from the table and walked to the back of the house, feeling the weight of their eyes following him. The root cellar entrance was concealed behind a heavy cabinet, and he moved it aside with effort born of determination rather than strength. "Daniel," he called softly into the darkness. "You can come out now. The sheriff wants to talk to you." Silence answered him, thick and absolute. Then, slowly, the boy emerged from the shadows, his face pale as milk, the pistol clutched in his trembling hands. "I heard them talking," Daniel whispered. "I heard what they said about taking me back." Elijah knelt down to meet the boy's eyes, gently removing the weapon from his grip. "I know you are scared," he said quietly. "I know this feels impossible, but I need you to be brave one more time. I need you to tell the sheriff the truth about what your father did to you. Can you do that for me?" Daniel's chin lifted, that familiar stubborn gesture that never failed to make Elijah proud. "You said bravery was being afraid and doing what needs done anyway," Daniel said. "I remember." "Then show them," Elijah replied. "Show them what real courage looks like." Daniel walked into the main room with Elijah's hand resting gently on his shoulder, a silent reminder that he was not alone. The boy's face was ashen, his breathing shallow and quick, but his steps did not falter. He looked at his father sitting at the table, and something shifted in his expression, fear giving way to something harder, something that had been forged in the months of healing and learning and growing that Marsh had never witnessed. Sheriff Coleman rose from his chair, his weathered face softening as he took in the child standing before him. He had children of his own, Elijah knew, a boy and two girls who ran laughing through the streets of town on summer evenings. Perhaps that was why his voice was gentle when he spoke. "Hello, Daniel. I am Sheriff Coleman. I just want to ask you some questions. Is that all right?" Daniel nodded, though his eyes kept darting to his father, tracking the threat the way a deer tracks a mountain lion. "Your PA here says you ran away from home. Says this man took you and would not let you go back. Is that true?" "No, sir." Daniel's voice was small but steady. "I ran away because I was scared. Mr. Cade found me and took care of me. He never made me stay. He said I could leave whenever I wanted." Crane leaned forward, his smile patronizing. "Of course he told you that. He wanted you to trust him so he could keep you from your father. Children do not always understand when adults are manipulating them. I understand plenty." Daniel's chin lifted, and Elijah felt a surge of pride at the defiance in his voice. "I understand what it feels like to be hit so hard you cannot breathe. I understand what it feels like to be burned with hot metal because you spilled water on the floor. I understand what it feels like to be so hungry you eat scraps from the pig trough because your PA decided you did not deserve dinner." The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Sheriff Coleman's expression had gone rigid, his eyes fixed on Daniel with horrified intensity. Even Crane seemed momentarily taken aback, his smooth composure cracking around the edges. Marsh recovered first, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. "You see what I mean? The boy has been coached. He is telling stories this stranger taught him to tell." Daniel's hands went to the hem of his shirt, and before anyone could react, he pulled the garment over his head. The scars stood out stark against his pale skin, a map of cruelty written in raised tissue and faded burns. Parallel lines on his back where a belt had struck repeatedly. Circular marks on his arms where hot metal had been pressed against flesh. A jagged scar across his ribs where something sharp had torn through skin and muscle. Sheriff Coleman made a sound low in his throat, something between a gasp and a growl. He moved closer, his trained eyes cataloging each wound, each piece of evidence that told a story no child should ever have to live. "These are not accidents," he said, his voice rough with barely contained fury. "These are deliberate injuries, systematic abuse." "The boy did this to himself," Marsh said quickly, desperation creeping into his tone. "He was always hurting himself for attention. His mother spoiled him, made him think the world revolved around him. When she died, He could not handle not being the center of everything anymore. Daniel pulled his shirt back on, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked directly at his father for the first time, and in his storm-gray eyes was something Elijah had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, but a cold and terrible certainty. "You held me down," Daniel said quietly. "When you burned me, you held me down so I could not get away. You told me if I screamed, you would do it again twice as bad. You said I deserved it because I was worthless, because I was a burden, because Ma dying was my fault somehow." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "I believed you for a long time. I thought I was everything you said I was. But Mr. Cade taught me different. He showed me what it looks like when someone cares about you without wanting to hurt you. He told me I was brave, and I did not believe him at first. But I am starting to believe him now." The room was utterly silent. Crane had stopped shuffling his papers, his face pale beneath its professional composure. Sheriff Coleman stood between Daniel and Marsh like a wall, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "I have heard enough," the sheriff said. His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. "Mr. Marsh, you are going to come with me back to town. There are going to be questions asked and answers given, and God help you if I do not like what I hear." "This is outrageous," Crane sputtered. "You cannot just dismiss my client's legal rights based on the word of a child who has clearly been influenced by this man. I demand a proper hearing, a judge, due process." "You will get your process," Coleman replied. "But until then, your client is coming with me, and this boy is staying right where he is." He looked at Elijah, and something passed between them, an understanding forged in shared recognition of what had to be protected. "I am sorry I doubted you." "You had to follow the law," Elijah said. "I understood that." Marsh was on his feet now, his face contorted with rage that he no longer bothered to conceal. "You cannot do this. He is my son, mine. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Coleman said, taking hold of Marsh's arm with a grip that allowed no resistance. "I suggest you use it." As the sheriff marched Marsh toward the door, the man twisted around, his eyes finding Daniel with venomous intensity. "This is not over," he hissed. "You hear me, boy? I will come back for you. I will always come back for you." Daniel did not flinch. He stood straight and steady, Elijah's hand on his shoulder, and met his father's gaze without wavering. "I am not afraid of you anymore," Daniel said. And that was the bravest thing Elijah had ever heard. Spring came slowly to the Colorado mountains that year, winter releasing its grip in grudging increments as the days lengthened and the snow retreated toward the highest peaks. The ranch emerged from its frozen dormancy like a creature waking from hibernation, the horses growing restless in their stalls, the land softening beneath the warming sun, the air carrying scents of growth and renewal that seemed to promise better days ahead. Word came from town in late March that Marsh had been convicted of child abuse and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Sheriff Coleman delivered the news personally, riding out to the ranch on a morning bright with possibility. He stayed for coffee and conversation, filling in the details that rumors had only hinted at. Other witnesses had come forward during the trial, neighbors who had heard screams from the Marsh homestead, a doctor who had treated Daniel's injuries and suspected their true source, a minister who had seen bruises that no child could have inflicted on himself. The weight of evidence had been overwhelming, and even Crane's legal maneuvering could not save his client from justice. Daniel received the news with quiet composure, nodding slowly as if confirming something he had already known. He did not celebrate or rejoice, did not express satisfaction at his father's punishment. Instead, he excused himself and walked out to the barn, where Shadow waited in his stall, the black horse who had learned to trust again through patience and kindness. Elijah found him there an hour later, sitting on a hay bale with his hand extended through the bars. Shadow stood close, his velvet nose pressed against Daniel's palm, accepting the touch that would have sent him into panicked flight just months before. "How do you feel?" Elijah asked, settling onto the bale beside him. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I thought I would feel happy," he said finally. "I thought knowing he could not hurt me anymore would make everything better. But it does not feel like I thought it would. It just feels strange. Empty, maybe. Elijah nodded, understanding perfectly. Justice is like that sometimes. It does not undo what happened. It just makes sure it cannot happen again. Will it ever stop hurting? Daniel asked. The memories, I mean. Will I ever be able to think about my life before without feeling sick? Elijah considered his answer carefully, wanting to offer hope without promising what he could not guarantee. The memories will always be part of you, he said, but they will not always have the power they have now. Someday, you will be able to look back and see how far you have come, how strong you have become because of what you survived. The pain will still be there, but it will be smaller and you will be bigger. Does that make sense? Daniel nodded slowly. Shadow made a soft sound and pressed closer, seeking the comfort of connection that both horse and boy had learned to trust. The legal proceedings that followed Marsh's conviction were complex but ultimately successful. Elijah filed for formal adoption with the help of a lawyer from Denver, a different man than Crane, one who believed that families were built on love rather than blood. The process took months, requiring interviews and home visits and mountains of paperwork. But by midsummer, the documents were signed and witnessed and filed with the territorial court. Daniel Cade. The boy said his new name aloud as they rode home from town, testing the sound of it on his tongue. It feels different. Good different. You can still use Marsh if you want, Elijah offered. Your mother's memory is tied to that name. I would not want you to feel like you are leaving her behind. Daniel shook his head firmly. Ma would understand. She would want me to have a name that means something good, that belongs to someone who actually loves me. He looked over at Elijah, his storm-gray eyes bright with emotion. Thank you for everything, for finding me and keeping me and teaching me and never giving up even when things got hard. Elijah felt his throat tighten with feeling he could not quite express. You taught me things too, he managed. Reminded me that there are still things worth fighting for. Gave me a reason to get up in the morning again. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses picking their way along the familiar trail toward home. The mountains rose around them, ancient and enduring, witnesses to countless stories of struggle and survival, and the stubborn persistence of hope. Can I ask you something? Daniel said as they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view below them. Anything. That first day, when I asked if you could teach me to be brave. Daniel paused, gathering his thoughts. You said I already was, that I just had not realized it yet. Did you really believe that, or were you just saying it to make me feel better? Elijah reined his horse to a stop, turning to face the boy who had become his son in every way that mattered. I believed it then, and I believe it now, he said. Bravery is not something you learn from someone else. It is something you discover in yourself when life pushes you to the edge and you choose to push back. All I did was help you see what was already there. He reached out and placed his scarred hand on Daniel's shoulder, feeling the solid strength beneath his palm. The boy who had grown into someone remarkable despite everything that had tried to break him. You walked 30 miles alone to find help. You trusted a stranger when trust had only brought you pain. You stood up to your father and told the truth when lying would have been easier. You showed a courtroom full of adults what real courage looks like. Elijah's voice was rough with pride and love. I could not teach you to be brave because you never needed the lesson. You already knew. Daniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. The boy who had appeared at the fence line 8 months ago, broken and terrified and barely alive, was gone. In his place was a young man with scars that would never fully fade, but wounds that were finally healing. Someone who had learned that survival was just the beginning and that living, truly living, was the real victory. They rode down to the ranch together, father and son, 2 scarred survivors who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Behind them, the sun was setting over the mountains in streaks of gold and crimson. Ahead of them, home was waiting, warm and welcoming and full of tomorrows they would face together.